One of the things that I'm most certain about is that many times in my life, I've been very certain about something that I should not have been certain about. I have figured out my life on too many occasions to count, which leads to those close to me rolling their eyes a lot when they hear my latest plan. Complacency is not quite something that's a problem to me, but I definitely have thought I was going to be in a season for a while when things ended up going in quite a different direction. It's something we've all probably experienced, and maybe you have had a tough time stepping out in faith because you just got used to how things were. Today's guest is Kate Battistelli. Kate is a former Broadway actress turned homeschooling mom and now empty nester. She's the author of books such as The God Dare, Growing Great Kids, and her latest book, The Afterparty of the Empty Nest. Kate is also one of the 3 hosts of the Mom to Mom podcast. Welcome to the Smashing Idols podcast. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is your call to break free from the things that pull you away from Jesus Christ. Each week I chat with theologians, ministers, cultural thinkers, and everyday believers to uncover how modern idols sneak into our lives and how we can smash them to pieces. We're not here for surface-level faith. We're here to dig deep, challenge the norms, rediscover what it means to follow Jesus with everything we've got. So if you're ready to kick distractions to the curb and embrace a faith worth living, you've come to the right place. And hey, don't forget to check out jakedoberenz.com/podcast to catch every episode and subscribe to the newsletter. So, you ready? Let's start smashing those idols. Kate, it's wonderful to have you on today.
Thanks, Jake. Great to meet you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm not a empty nester by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm excited for that conversation and for just the larger conversation about complacency. That's a
excellent
topic we need to talk about sometimes. Well, let's begin right there at kind of, I guess, the origin point of this particular book we're talking about. So you found yourself an empty nester when your daughter went off to pursue music in Nashville, and you didn't know what to do with your life. But that's when God dared you to take a next step of faith. So tell us about that time and let us know, what did God dare you to do next?
Well, it's really a crazy thing. It's so easy to get stuck, as a lot of us do at different seasons in our life. But for me, I can just tell you the short story of how that all happened. Our daughter had gone to Nashville. Her name was beginning to be known. You know, her music was out and she was being nominated for stuff. So people were starting to know who she was. And she'd been homeschooled for most of her growing up. And we lived in Orlando at the time. And she was part of a big homeschool, like an umbrella organization. So one night, the gal who ran that, she calls me up and she says, Kate, we're having our big 20th anniversary. We want you and Mike, your husband Mike, to come and speak to our parents. Tell them, what did you do to raise your daughter to not just find her path, but to continue to follow the Lord? Because so many young people walk away. You know, they go to college, whatever. And, come and tell our parents, what did you do? So I thought, well, I hung up the phone. I said, yeah, sure, we'll come and talk. And I looked at my husband. I said, what the heck did we do? Because, you're not, there's not like a book other than the Bible. There's no parenting manual. We were just trying to raise her according to biblical principles. And so we give our talk. Well, we sat down and we actually came up with 15 things. And I thought, well, okay, we didn't do too badly. We actually did some good biblical training. So a couple of weeks later, we give our talk. And the next day, I'm praying, I'm thanking the Lord that it went well. And just as I thanked him for those 15 things, I heard the Lord speak in my spirit. And he said, those are book chapters. And I mean, I just thought, Lord, well, no, I'm not a writer. I didn't graduate from college. I actually went to 4 colleges in 2 years. Didn't graduate from any of them because I wanted to do theater. I was just like, college, you're just not fitting into my life. So I thought, I can't write a book. No one will publish it. I'm not a parenting expert. All the excuses you give God not to do what he's calling you to do. But I ended up, I found a friend who is a writing coach, and she told me that, yep, this is a book, because I doubted it, but I kept hearing the Lord saying that. So eventually I wrote the book. I got it published, which none of it made any sense, because you don't get books published without an agent typically, unless you're self-publishing. And back then self-publishing wasn't even a thing. So none of it made sense, yet the Lord made it happen. And because I was obedient in that, now, I've written 3 books, lots of different things have happened, but I was willing to step out in that season when I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just stuck, because for those who are empty nesters are going to be, it's a hard season. You've been identified as one thing, and now you're not that anymore. Not at that level. You're still a mom, but you're not a mom with kids home all the time. So it was very easy for me to become complacent and sad and full of self-pity, just be stuck there. So that's kind of how it worked for me. And then, just writing that first book kind of pulled me into a whole other life. Something if you'd told me 15 years ago, Kate, in 15 years, you'll have written 3 books, you'll be part of a successful podcast, you'll speak around the country, I said, you're crazy. That's not me. But God says that is me, and sometimes we define ourselves how we think we are. And God says, no, you're somebody else, like David, the shepherd. And God says, no, you're a king. Who's the other one I can't think of his name now. Gideon. That's the one I'm thinking of. He's threshing in the winepress, and God calls him, oh, mighty man of valor. And I imagine him just looking around going, who's he talking to? You know what I'm saying? God has a name for us that is not necessarily the name we call ourselves. So that might have been way more than you asked, but that's my answer.
No, that's a great intro to the topic, of course, and those biblical examples, are profound. Those are other great examples of how God encourages us to step out to new adventures and things like that. That's how it works sometimes, and we got to be prepared for that. So you've had an interesting life. I mean, Broadway actress, homeschooling mom, author, podcaster. You've done some cool stuff. You got a great resume, and I can certainly see how eras of your life would become comfortable, for this complacency to set in, like you mentioned, only for God to call you to another chapter. But many people do not want to flip to that next chapter. They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this idol of complacency. How have you seen it creep into the lives of believers? Why are people attracted to complacency?
Well, it's easy. It's easy not to do something for the Lord. It's easy not to step out. That's why I wrote a book called The God Dare, because God will constantly try to push us to, do this thing. I'm convinced that each of us is on this planet for a reason. We're all here. We were created for something specific in this time in history, which when you think about it, that's quite an honor that God saved us to the end. I mean, if you think about it, wow, we are in what I believe are the final days of this planet. I think things are going downhill pretty rapidly. I don't know how much longer till the Lord returns, but I think, man, we can't afford to be complacent. There's too many people that don't know about the Lord, that have never heard of his saving power, just all the amazing things that Jesus does for us when we invite him into our lives. And God needs us for Christians. I mean, there's just lots of people that are complacent, but I know this podcast is geared to Christians. If you're a Christian and you're not doing much, particularly where I live, there's a lot of young families, a lot of retired people. They play golf, pickleball, all that stuff, which is fine, but that becomes their life. And I'm thinking, man, I don't want to sit and write every day. There's times I want to go shopping or go spend time with a friend, and I do some of those things, but I'm much more limited because I know God has a mandate for me to write what he's telling me to write. So I have to give up some things. There's always a cost to obeying the Lord. But the Bible says faith without works is dead. If our faith is dead, is it faith? These are bigger questions that we probably want to tackle, but I just think it's so easy to get stuck in the American church. The American church, in my opinion, is very complacent. What we're being taught is very lightweight. Most Christians, very small percentage, read the Bible. Like, our lifestyle is complacency. I think it's just because it's easy. We're for the most part, the country's fairly affluent. Most people have, a decent job or an income or whatever. It's easy to just go, well, this is my life. It's sad to me that so many people, and a lot of times you can see the potential and see that they're just not using it. We've got some dear friends that just their life, they have great money so they can do what they want. And they do. They'll go off and do this or do that. And I think that is super cool that they can do that. But what's the eternal value of that? I want my life, I want it to have had value. I'll tell you a short story. You may not know who he is, but do you know who Reinhard Bonnke is? Did you ever hear of him? A major evangelist.
No, I don't think so.
He was like the Billy Graham of Africa. So millions came into the kingdom. This is back, I don't know, 70s, 80s, what you probably weren't even born. But he was a huge evangelist. And one day at the height of his ministry, God said to him, "You are my third choice." I mean, imagine just the humbling of that, which we all need. But God asked two other men to do what Reinhard Bonnke ended up saying yes to, two guys that said no. And I just imagine them getting to heaven and God saying, look what you turned down. Because for whatever reason, I don't know why they said no, but it's so easy for us to say no to God. I like to say this in the God Dare, you have to choose to be chosen to change the world. You have to say yes. If you say no, God's going to find somebody else. Like for you starting a podcast and saying, I'm going to do this thing. Starting a podcast is not an easy thing, to get followers, to do what you're doing. It takes a lot. It probably means you have to miss things. And so, no, I can't do that. I've got to edit or whatever. But you're doing something to build the kingdom. And that's what I don't know. I get pretty heavy with this stuff because I feel like there's a real lack of fear of the Lord. We don't understand what all this means. We don't understand that we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. So I don't know. You probably don't want to get that heavy, but I think about that stuff.
I think it's a good thing to think about for sure. And that leads me kind of to this next question because no, I was not alive in the 70s and 80s. I'm 27. I'm a spring chicken. I'm young, relatively speaking, depending on who you ask. And I know I struggle with kind of figuring out, I mentioned this in the intro, right? What am I supposed to do? What's my next thing? So what do you recommend on how do we find that purpose? How do we discern that call of God?
Well, I think you have to want to. The fact that you're wanting that is major. And then really it's going to be prayer because not everybody's going to have it right away. God didn't call me to start writing and doing these things till after my daughter was gone. If you're married and you've got kids and you're in a different season. So it just depends. It can happen like Samuel. He was 4 years old when God called him. There's so many times that in the Bible when people are young, Jeremiah was probably a boy or a young teen. And God said, this is what you're doing. It doesn't always happen that way, probably less that way than we're adults or we're maybe thinking about going into college and God is leading you in a specific direction to study this. This is where I'm going to use you. So it can come at any time, but it's often going to just come out of nowhere. Like for me, it was never in my mind. It wasn't ever something I yearned to write books. It's like, no, that sounds like a lot of work. And it is a lot of work. I wouldn't have picked it for myself, but I was willing to say yes. And that's the difference. That's why God hopefully can use my words to impact people. I think he has just the feedback that you get. I'm sure you get that with the podcast. So it's really, it just comes down to saying yes and praying and saying, Lord, where do you want me to be? And if he's not told you yet, you just wait till he does. Be patient, what does it say? Don't grow weary in well doing. Be doing something, to build the kingdom. Be volunteer or mentor, do whatever you can. And the Lord will show you. If you ask, he's going to tell you. It's that most of us don't ask because we know there's going to be a price or we're lazy, or don't just figure I'm just living my happy life and this is what it's going to be,
I do know. I'm an author as well. And so, I understand the writing it's challenging. People think, it's just a easy peasy all the time. But actually, no, that takes a lot of work to put those words on the page and to work with God and get a message out. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. And that's helpful to consider as we think about our purposes and our callings and what that next chapter is for us. So, speaking of the next chapter, I do want to talk more specifically about your most recent book here, as I know there are audience members who might have the same experience of being an empty nester. I'm going to make sure my mom listens to this, and she's an empty nester, right? So at least just talk to my mom.
Okay.
But for moms in the audience in general, whether they're an empty nester yet or not, or for parents even more broadly, who might feel like I'm scared of that parenting role change, or there's some fear associated, whatever. What's the main thing you want to know, or what's that core thesis of your book that you really want them to understand?
Well, it is scary because again, you're losing an identity that you had, at least in the way you had it. You're still mom or dad, but not the way you were. You've suddenly got all this free time, typically. I mean, if you're working full time, that's different, but still you're going to have more time because you're not figuring out schedules. You're not being the chauffeur or the cook or any of that. You've suddenly got, wow. And that was how it was for me. I thought, what do I do? I've never planned for it. And most of us don't, because you're so busy in the day to day with your kids that it never occurs to you that it's not going to be like that. So when it hits you, it's a big shock. And so I like to tell moms, if they're facing it, coming into it in the next few years, start planning now for that time. Don't let it sneak up on you like it did to me, because it's hard. So it's a matter, like anything, it's trusting the Lord, praying, letting him show you, beginning to prepare as best you can, as best you know where he's leading you. Try to prepare for that as best you can.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure that is something good for parents to remember. Again, I'm not an empty nester. I never even had a nest, but I think that's a valuable perspective, especially that identity thing. Like, my goodness, isn't that tough?
Yeah.
I write a lot about identity, and this show encounters that a lot because we wrap our identity in certain things. Some of them aren't bad, like being a mom, being a parent, it's not a bad identity, but that can be elevated to some ways that it can get destructive. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use, but it can get dangerous territory if we elevate those identities too much.
Well, it can become idolized too, that becomes your thing, is raising those kids. So they're gone. Suddenly your identity shifts, because most of us have more than one, because we are this, but we're also this and we're also that. So I asked the moms in the book, what's your and also? I'm a mom and also, I do this or I do that, and it can be big or small. God is looking for obedience for some people listening, whether it's empty nester or not. What your future is and your call may be huge, maybe to have the biggest podcast in the world, or write it, sell 1 million books. That's great. But I don't think God measures that against the person who's, volunteering to watch kids at church, or the person maybe going to the Alzheimer's unit to be able to take care of those people. God's not saying one's better than the other because it's bigger. We tend to think in America, it has to be bigger to be better. Most of us, the vast majority, will labor in obscurity on this planet. What we're going to do is going to be small to us. But I think about Billy Graham's mother. She didn't know he was going to be Billy Graham. She just, I'm sure, raised him and nurtured him and put him on the right path. And then look what happened in his life because of his mom. I even see with my husband and I didn't tell you our whole theater story, but we ended up laying down. We were doing great in our careers. My husband was conducting on Broadway and, Radio City. I was doing all kinds of things. God told us when we got saved. We weren't saved when we first met. I didn't get saved till I was 29 and he was 32. And the Lord told us at the height of things going great, he said, that's not the path I have for you. You need to lay that down. And we did. And it made no sense. Everybody thought we were crazy because you just don't do that. When you've spent your whole life towards a specific goal and God says, nope, that's not what I want. It's hard to just pick up stakes and go. It's kind of like Abraham, when God says, leave everything that you know, your family, your land, everything, go to a land that I'll show you. but I'm not going to tell you. You just obey. It was that kind of thing. It was like, well, okay, I guess we don't know what we're doing. But I think that obedience in anything at any age, for any of us that are struggling with a difficult thing God may be calling us to, when you obey now, there's going to be fruit in the future. And I believe that because I wanted to be famous, I wanted to win a Tony Award, I wanted people to know my name and love me. And God said, He was like, I'm going to use the talent and the giftings, but I can't use it through you because you want it for yourself. I can take it through your daughter because she wants to worship me. She wants to make my name famous. And I like to say our ceiling became her floor. All that we had learned, all that we knew about that whole entertainment world, where it was able to be a floor for her to begin to stand on. Now she's leaving a floor for her kids, or leaving a ceiling for her kids. And I think when you're obedient, you're going to see fruit from that. It may not be right away. And I tell people, age gives perspective. What you don't see now, it makes no sense. 5-10 years from now, you're going to go, that's exactly why that happened. Now I totally get it, Lord. But you won't often in the beginning, and that's okay. You don't have to understand it. The Lord does such weird things. I mean, I look at my life and I go, God, how did you come up with any of this? But, it was my call from the foundation of the world. We all have that. And it's a matter of going just in our minds. It's saying yes. If God is our focus, if we're in love with Jesus Christ, He is our all in all. We'll do anything for Him. Are we willing to lay down everything? And I don't know that all of us are. I pray all the time. I'm like, Lord, in this, end of the age, crazy world that we live in, don't let me ever give in to deception. Keep me with you, whatever it costs. I want to be brave enough to lay down my life. Am I? I don't know. Until my life is on the line, I just pray I will say yes. And I just don't see that in the church. Do you? I mean, I just don't see real passion for Jesus. I know we're probably getting off track, but yeah, that bothers me.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your perspective that you're offering us here. To use your word, like, God works in kind of weird ways and we don't always understand. And you never know what you're preparing for the next generation, for your kids, for somebody else, how you're paving the way. And that is very important to remember. And I agree that complacency is an issue with many Christians.
Yeah.
And, when the chips are down, I don't know how many people will really want to keep following Jesus. It really, really, really gets hard, or if there's a decision that they're forced to make. So I appreciate all of that. I'm wondering now, as we a little bit begin to wrap up, if you can just talk to somebody that might be struggling with that comfort and complacency as their idol. What is that next step towards freedom? What should they do?
I think it really comes down to trusting the Lord, to saying, okay, God, this seems crazy, but I'm going to trust you. If it's the Lord, it's probably going to be scary. Typically it's not just, often, I can't say not typically, because a lot of times God will say, yes, go for that. And I've always wanted to be a missionary. Now he's releasing me to go. But a lot of times it's not. He's trying to pull you out of something because he knows that what you're in, it's not life-giving, not to yourself or to anybody else. So the main thing I would say is have courage. I like to think of it as bungee jumping with the Lord. Are you willing to take that jump? In the world, I would never bungee jump because I don't trust the guy who's running the bungee jump. What if he does something wrong and I fall and crash and die? So I'm not going to trust that guy. But the Lord, it's still just as dangerous and scary for some people. But I know I can trust him. He will always catch me. So the main message I would say is, which is what I've talked about in all my books, it's my life message, is be willing to take that step, do the impossible. The impossible is God's comfort zone. It's not mine. I'm only comfortable with the impossible, but be willing to choose to be chosen to change the world and jump out and do that thing. Don't let fear stop you. Fear is fear and doubt are probably the enemies two biggest weapons. So don't give in to fear.
Well, thank you so much for all the wisdom about complacency and about our identities and offering us that perspective. We do have one more question for you at the end, but now's the part of the show where you kind of talk about where to find your book and if people want to check out the kind of things you're doing. Where do you want to send people?
Sure. I mean, they can go to my website, katebattistelli.com. Super easy. Everywhere on social media, I'm just at Kate Battistelli. So, and you can always find me that way. And the book right now is only available on Amazon. It's called The Afterparty of the Empty Nest. Mom is Not Your Only Name. So that's available on Amazon right now. Should be more places soon. Yeah, all my 3 books are there. And then I'm part of the Mom to Mom podcast. If you have any younger moms any age mom, but particularly moms that are really looking for some wisdom, we're 3 generations of moms. So we've got a 40s, a 50s, and then I always say I'm the old one. So they get a much broader perspective on everything that has to do with motherhood. So it's a little bit different podcast, but it's a good one.
I like that format. I like anything that promotes that intergenerational connection and wisdom is awesome. I will do my best to throw all that stuff in the show notes links, and that'll be on our Substack and all that fun stuff so people can check out all those cool things. Just like you, Mom, who hopefully is listening to this. She can check out
Hi,
that
Mom.
stuff. She might not listen to your podcast because, she's after that.
Well, she's after that.
Yeah. Well, there's another book to add to her collection. Great. So let's get that last question. This real meaty, fun one we get to ask here at the end where we can challenge everybody. So here's the question for you. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
Pray. That's the one practical thing, because it's only in prayer and worship we're going to ever hear him. So that would be my practical. I mean, it's not something get up and do, just other than just get up and go pray somewhere, pray, read the word. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing I can think of to guide you with anything in life.
Awesome. Sometimes we got to get back to the core principles, the basics. That is always a good practical action, especially as we learn to trust God, get on that God bungee jump, but just like you, not doing a real one, but let's get on the God version for sure. So awesome. Kate, thank you so much. Before we go, we do have a sharing challenge. I just try to encourage listeners to share this episode with somebody else they think might benefit. Today's an obvious one. Share this with a mom or somebody in the empty nest stage of life. I mean, a lot of people can have that idol of complacency, but we did talk about that area a little bit more specifically. So go ahead and share it with somebody there. Once again, Kate Battistelli, thank you so much for providing all this great wisdom and encouragement and perspective for us. I so appreciate you being on the Smashing Idols podcast.
Thank you, Jake. I was thrilled to be a guest with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening today to Smashing Idols. To learn more about the show and me, Jake Doberenz, head over to jakedoberenz.com and be sure to check us out on Substack. That's jakedoberenz.substack.com. There you can subscribe to this podcast, which comes out every Tuesday morning, and you can subscribe to the newsletter, also called Smashing Idols, which comes out on Friday morning, where I dive into these subjects in a short essay. You can follow me on Twitter and Threads and Instagram and all the places at Jake Doberenz. I'd love to continue the conversation there. All right, everybody, grab those hammers, get to smashing those idols.